The text wasn't meant for me. 3 decades of marriage, and our end began with a message intended for someone else. I'd only picked up Claire's tablet to look up a recipe while Seattle's latest storm lashed our windows. We need to end this before Liam suspects. 14 months is too long to risk everything. 14 months. My best friend, Robert, had been diagnosed 14 months ago. While I'd sat at his hospital bedside, my wife and my client had begun their betrayal. The tablet's blue glow illuminated my wedding band as rain streaked down the glass like tears I wouldn't allow myself to shed. At 62, I thought I understood betrayal from decades representing the wronged in court. I was wrong. They say wisdom comes with age, but sometimes so does betrayal. What they didn't count on was that 30 years practicing law teaches you exactly how justice works. The morning before my world collapsed, I stood before 3 associates in our firm's conference room. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Seattle's skyline, partially obscured by gathering storm clouds. The difference between a good attorney and a great one isn't knowing more law, I told them, tapping a meticulous case file. It's documenting everything so thoroughly that the truth can't be buried. I'd built my reputation on this principle through 35 years of practice. Sarah Chen, our newest hire, looked skeptical. Isn't that excessive in the digital age? Everything's searchable now. I smiled, remembering similar conversations with Robert. When opposing counsel accidentally deletes emails or claims the cloud ate their records, physical documentation becomes evidence of what was conveniently lost. Trust me, people haven't changed, only their methods of hiding the truth. The conference room door opened as Maria Vasquez, my assistant of 20 years, appeared. Her expression told me something was wrong before she spoke. Mr. Walsh, the arrangements for Mr. Sullivan's memorial service tonight have been confirmed, and Mr. Langston called again about the Eastern Holdings merger. Robert's memorial service. 6 months after cancer took him, we were finally gathering to celebrate his life. The timing of Marcus Langston's call felt like an intrusion. Tell Marcus I'll call him tomorrow. Tonight is about Robert. Rain had begun in earnest by evening, typical Seattle weather that matched the mood at Canlis Restaurant where Robert's colleagues and friends gathered. I stood alone by the window, watching droplets race down the glass when I felt a hand on my shoulder. He would have appreciated the turnout, Marcus Langston said, gesturing to the crowded room. At 47, Marcus projected the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. His technology firm had been my client for 15 years. Robert hated crowds, I replied. But he would have appreciated people remembering him. How's Claire handling everything? Marcus asked, his attention shifting as my wife entered the room. She'd changed her hair recently, subtle highlights that caught the light as she moved. She's been my rock, I said, watching her acknowledge several guests but not approach us. 30 years of marriage teaches you how to support each other through grief. Marcus nodded. That kind of stability is rare these days. You're a fortunate man. Something in his tone caught my attention, a hint of something I couldn't identify. Before I could analyze it, Claire approached, wearing a black dress I didn't recognize. I'm sorry I'm late, she said, kissing my cheek without meeting my eyes. Department meeting ran long. Marcus was just saying how rare our stability is, I replied, studying her expression. She glanced at Marcus, a flicker of something passing between them. We should find our seats, she said, turning away quickly. And throughout dinner, I watched them from across the table. Claire seemed unusually animated when speaking with Marcus, laughing at his jokes while her hand occasionally touched her neck where a new pendant rested, Another item I didn't recognize. When Judge Martha Wilson delivered a moving tribute to Robert's integrity, I noticed Claire checking her phone beneath the table. "Headache," Claire whispered later, gathering her things. "I should go home before it gets worse." "I'll come with you," I offered, concerned. "No, stay. Robert was your best friend. I'll take a car service." Marcus stood. "I'm heading out too. I can make sure she gets home safely." Something primitive stirred within me, a warning I immediately dismissed as grief making me irrational. I'd known Marcus for 15 years, trusted him with complex legal matters. Claire had been my partner through every career milestone. "Thank you," I said, watching them leave together. That night, Claire returned late, slipping into bed without speaking. When I asked about her headache, she murmured something about medication helping before turning away. The distance between us felt wider than the physical inches separating our bodies. Over breakfast the next morning, I noticed more changes that had gradually accumulated. Claire's passwords on her devices had changed. Her schedule, once predictable after years at the university, now included evening meetings and weekend conferences I couldn't recall her mentioning before. Small withdrawals from our joint account appeared for restaurants I'd never visited. "You've seemed distant lately," I said, watching her prepare to leave earlier than usual. "Is everything all right?" She paused, hand tightening on her travel mug. "Everything's fine, just busy with the department restructuring." "You'd tell me if something was wrong?" "Of course," she said, not meeting my eyes. 30 years of marriage, no secrets between us. The slight tremor in her voice triggered my attorney's instinct, the sense that someone wasn't telling the whole truth. But I dismissed it, choosing trust over suspicion. Later that day, Maria stepped into my office, closing the door, something she rarely did. "Mr. Walsh, is everything okay at home?" The question startled me. "Why do you ask?" She hesitated. "Mrs. Walsh has called several times asking if you'll be working late, even on days when your calendar shows no evening appointments. And there have been calls from Mr. Langston when you're out that seem personal." "I'm sure there's an explanation," I said, not entirely believing it myself. "Claire's been under pressure with her department changes." Maria nodded, unconvinced. "Of course, I've worked with you for 20 years. You've always been attentive to details. I thought you should know." That evening, I arrived home to find Claire rushing to leave. "Emergency department meeting," she explained, barely making eye contact. "Don't wait up." "On a Friday night?" "Budget crisis, you know how it is." She left her tablet on the kitchen counter in her haste. "Can you plug that in to charge?" "Thanks." The house felt emptier than usual as the storm intensified outside. Robert would have been my confidant for these growing concerns. Without him, I felt adrift with suspicions I couldn't articulate. I picked up Claire's tablet to move it to the charger when a notification illuminated the screen. A text message not meant for my eyes that would end 30 years of certainty in 23 words. Rain lashed against the windows as I stared at Claire's tablet, the message still glowing. "We need to end this before Liam suspects. 14 months is too long to risk everything." The sender, Marcus Langston. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't quicken. Instead, a strange calm descended, the same detached analysis that had served me in countless depositions when confronted with unexpected evidence. I plugged in the tablet, deliberately not opening the message thread to read more. That would be an invasion of privacy my legal mind recognized, though I laughed bitterly at the irony of protecting the privacy of an affair. 14 months. The timeline wasn't coincidental. Robert had been diagnosed 14 months ago. While I'd spent nights at the hospital supporting my dying friend, my wife and client had begun their betrayal. I didn't confront Claire when she returned after midnight. Instead, I feigned sleep while mentally constructing a timeline of suspicious behavior I'd ignored. The new clothes, changed passwords, unexplained absences. Marcus's increased presence in our lives as Robert's illness progressed. By morning, the attorney in me had formulated a plan. I wouldn't act on emotion or incomplete information. I would investigate with the same thoroughness I applied to my cases. "Late night?" I asked over coffee, studying Claire's face. "Budget meetings are brutal," she replied, not meeting my eyes. "I'm presenting to the board next week." I nodded. "I've got a breakfast meeting. Don't wait up tonight. Depositions might run late." No such depositions existed, but Claire didn't question it. Her relief at my absence was palpable. Instead of going to the office, I drove to a coffee shop in Fremont, where I'd met James Kovacs many times. A former detective turned private investigator, James had worked with our firm on countless cases. He arrived punctually, ordered black coffee, and listened without expression as I explained the situation. "You understand what you're asking me to investigate?" he finally said. "I need documentation that would stand up in court," I replied, attorney mode fully engaged. "Bank records, photographs, communications if possible." James stirred his coffee. "You know, it's interesting. Langston's name has come up in another case I'm working. Different context, but similar pattern." "Similar how?" "Let's just say your wife might not be his only extracurricular activity." He studied me. "You're taking this very calmly." 35 years of law practice teaches you to collect evidence before reacting. Most men in your position wouldn't be so methodical. I gazed out at the rain. Most men haven't spent their careers watching emotional decisions destroy lives. 3 days later, James delivered an encrypted file to my office. The contents confirmed what I'd already accepted. Claire and Marcus had been meeting regularly for 14 months. The photographs showed them entering his downtown penthouse, where she apparently had her own key, hotel receipts, restaurant charges, all meticulously documented with times and dates. Most damning was the timeline. Their first documented meeting occurred the day after Robert's diagnosis, when I'd spent the night at the hospital while specialists confirmed the cancer was terminal. While I'd sat with my dying friend, my wife had begun her affair with my client. That evening, I waited for Claire in our living room, the storm outside matching my internal turmoil. When she entered, her smile faltered at the sight of the evidence folder on the coffee table. "What's that?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "Documentation," I replied, using the word I'd emphasized to associates just days earlier. "Of your relationship with Marcus." She didn't immediately deny it, a small mercy. Instead, she sank into the chair opposite me, her face draining of color. "How long have you known? Does it matter?" I opened the folder, laying out photographs methodically. 14 months is the answer, beginning the day after Robert was diagnosed. Claire flinched. "It wasn't planned that way." "That makes it better." "You weren't here, Liam. You were always at the hospital with Robert or at the office. Marcus was attentive when you weren't." The calculated manipulation in her words ignited something beyond the calm I'd maintained. "I was supporting my dying friend, and you used that time to begin an affair with my client. You don't understand what it's been like living in the shadow of your career, your perfect ethics, your constant focus on other people's problems." I laughed without humor. "Is that the justification you've constructed? That my professional dedication somehow excuses betrayal?" It wasn't just about the affair, Claire said, desperation entering her voice. There are things about Marcus you don't know. I know enough. I closed the folder. I've spent my career distinguishing facts from excuses. Don't insult us both by offering the latter. What happens now? She asked, voice small. Now you leave. Tonight. The guest room at your sister's should suffice until you find something permanent. You're evicting me after 30 years? No, Claire. You evicted yourself the moment you gave Marcus Langston a key to his apartment. I stood, maintaining the composure that had served me in countless courtrooms. I'll be filing for divorce. Given the circumstances, I suggest you don't contest it. Liam, please. You don't understand what Marcus is capable of. The hint of fear in her voice nearly penetrated my resolve, but I'd heard similar tactics from countless witnesses attempting to deflect blame. Pack what you need for tonight. You can arrange to collect the rest later. She rose shakily. 30 years ends like this? No, I replied, my voice finally betraying emotion. 30 years ended 14 months ago. We're just now acknowledging it. As Claire climbed the stairs to pack, my phone buzzed with a text from James Kovacs. You should know, Langston's pattern involves more than just affairs. Call me when you can. Outside, the storm intensified, rain driving against windows that suddenly felt like barriers to a world I no longer recognized. The life I'd built with such careful attention to detail had been built on shifting sand. Now, as the foundation crumbled, I would need to construct something new from the ruins. Seattle's persistent rain continued into the week following Claire's departure. I arrived at the office earlier than usual, the emptiness of my home driving me toward work's familiar structure. The building stood nearly vacant at 5:30 a.m., security guards nodding as I made my way to the firm's archives. Marcus Langston had been our client for 15 years. If the affair with Claire was part of a pattern, as James suggested, perhaps there were professional improprieties I'd overlooked as well. The archive room smelled of paper and time, a sanctuary of documentation in an increasingly digital world. I pulled Marcus's client files, spreading them across the conference table chronologically. His technology firm, Langston Innovations, had grown from a promising startup to a regional powerhouse under our legal guidance. I began with recent transactions, the Eastern Holdings merger negotiations that had consumed much of my time recently. The financial disclosures seemed straightforward at first glance, but attorney instinct, honed through decades of practice, told me something wasn't right. Mr. Walsh? Maria's voice startled me. She stood in the doorway, concern evident. I thought I saw your office light on. You're here early. Just reviewing some files, I replied, not specifying which ones. She approached cautiously. Claire called yesterday asking for your schedule. I said I'd have to check with you first. Thank you, I said, appreciating her discretion. Maria hesitated, then gestured toward Marcus's files. I've been wondering when you'd look into these. What do you mean? She closed the door, lowering her voice. I've had concerns about Mr. Langston's accounts for months, but I didn't want to overstep. The documentation for several transactions seemed incomplete. Show me, I said, making room at the table. Maria pulled several files, pointing to discrepancies I'd missed. Wire transfers to overseas accounts, art purchases with fluctuating valuations, consulting fees to shell companies. None individually suspicious enough to trigger alarm, but collectively forming a troubling pattern. Why didn't you bring this to me sooner? Maria's eyes lowered. Mr. Langston said you'd approved the structure. And recently, He mentioned his close relationship with your family made you comfortable with certain arrangements. The implication struck like a physical blow. Marcus had leveraged his relationship with Claire to suggest I was complicit in financial irregularities. I've never approved any of these transactions, I said firmly. I suspected as much, Maria replied, especially after noticing Mrs. Walsh's unusual visits to Mr. Langston's office when you were out. My phone interrupted with a call from Thomas Reynolds, a colleague from another firm. Liam? Thomas began without preamble. I heard about Claire and Marcus. We need to talk. We arranged to meet at a quiet restaurant near the courthouse. Thomas arrived looking haggard, ordering scotch despite the early hour. It happened to me, too, he said after his first sip. 3 years ago. My wife Sarah had an affair with Marcus while we were handling his Series C funding. I maintained my composure despite the revelation. You never mentioned this. Would you have? The humiliation, the professional complications? Thomas shook his head. But when I heard about Claire, I couldn't stay silent. There's more to it than just affairs. Financial irregularities, I suggested. Thomas looked surprised. You found those too? Yes, but it's worse. He uses the wives to access confidential information. I lost clients after Sarah's affair. Conflicts they couldn't explain suddenly emerged. Proprietary information somehow leaked. The picture growing clearer sickened me. Marcus hadn't just betrayed me personally. He'd been systematically exploiting relationships to gain business advantages. How many others? I asked. At least 3 that I know of, all attorneys or financial advisors. All with wives who fit a certain profile, accomplished, slightly older than Marcus, often feeling overshadowed by their husbands' careers. The description of Claire was unnervingly accurate. I thought of her complaints about living in my shadow, wondering how much Marcus had cultivated that perception. Have you taken this to the authorities? Thomas laughed bitterly. With what proof? Affairs aren't crimes. The financial matters are complex, designed to appear legitimate, and Marcus is careful to maintain plausible deniability. As I left the restaurant, my phone buzzed with a calendar notification. Seattle Bar Association dinner that evening. Normally, Claire would accompany me. The thought of attending alone, knowing colleagues might be aware of my situation, was deeply unpleasant, but absence would only fuel speculation. The Grand Hyatt ballroom glittered with Seattle's legal elite when I arrived. Conversations quieted momentarily as I entered alone, then resumed with slightly greater animation. I maintained a practiced smile, accepting condolences for Robert's passing from those who approached, while ignoring the curious glances. Liam, Judge Martha Wilson greeted me, her firm handshake conveying more than words. At 70, she commanded universal respect. Walk with me to the bar? As we moved through the crowd, she spoke quietly. I understand you're going through a difficult time. Know that those who matter still hold you in the highest regard. Thank you, Martha, I replied, grateful for the subtle support. Marcus Langston is present tonight, she continued, glancing toward the far side of the room. Arrived with Elena Thornton from the prosecutor's office. Former prosecutor, I should say. I followed her gaze to see Marcus charming a group that included several judges. Beside him stood an elegant woman with silver-streaked dark hair, watching him with an expression I couldn't quite read. Elena left the prosecutor's office rather abruptly last year, Martha continued. Financial Crimes Division. Quite talented. Before I could respond, I overheard a nearby conversation. Langston's company is underwater. That's why he's pushing for the merger with Eastern Holdings. The evening proceeded like a carefully choreographed dance, with me moving through professional obligations while accumulating fragments of information. Marcus was struggling financially. The Eastern Holdings merger was increasingly urgent. And most interestingly, his wife Elena was watching him with the calculated assessment of a predator studying prey. As I prepared to leave, I noticed Elena Langston standing alone, her gaze following me. Our eyes met briefly, and I recognized something familiar in her expression. The same methodical evaluation I'd been conducting myself. She raised her champagne glass slightly in acknowledgement, a gesture that conveyed neither sympathy nor challenge, but something more intriguing, recognition. In that moment, I understood we shared more than being connected to Marcus Langston. We shared purpose. 3 days after the Bar Association dinner, I received an elegant cream envelope at my office. Inside, an invitation to a charity auction benefiting Seattle Children's Hospital with a handwritten note. Mr. Walsh, your perspective would be valuable. Elena Langston. The use of her married name rather than her professional name was deliberate, I suspected. A signal that her invitation had more to do with our mutual connection than philanthropy. The auction was held at the Seattle Art Museum, marble floors reflecting the city's elite as they circulated among displayed items. I spotted Elena immediately, her posture distinctive among the crowd, observational rather than performative. Mr. Walsh, she greeted me, extending her hand. Thank you for coming. Your invitation was intriguing, I replied, noting her firm handshake, a prosecutor's grip. Let's view the art, she suggested, guiding me toward a less crowded gallery. Once relative privacy was established, she spoke directly. I understand we share a common interest in Marcus. That's one way to put it. I prefer precision, she said, studying a contemporary painting without really seeing it. So let me be precise. I've been tracking Marcus's affairs for years and his financial manipulations for longer. I maintained neutral expression. You seem remarkably calm about your husband's infidelities. Our marriage has been a legal arrangement for some time, Elena replied. What interests me is that you, unlike his previous targets, are methodically investigating rather than reacting emotionally. Previous targets, I repeated. You're aware of a pattern. 5 that I've documented, she confirmed. All wives of men with access to information or legal expertise Marcus needed. Your wife Claire was different only in how long the relationship lasted. The clinical way she discussed Claire might have angered me days earlier. Now it simply reinforced my analytical approach. Why are you telling me this? Elena turned from the artwork to face me directly. Because I've been waiting for someone with both the legal expertise and personal motivation to help end his games. Most men in your position either lash out ineffectively or retreat in humiliation. You're building a case. And what's your interest beyond being the wronged wife? A smile touched her lips. I was a prosecutor specializing in financial crimes for 15 years. Marcus didn't marry me for my charm. Yet you've remained married while knowing about his affairs. Strategic patience, Mr. Walsh. I've been collecting evidence for a specific purpose. Which is? Let's discuss that somewhere more private. Perhaps the university library tomorrow, neutral ground with private study rooms. The following afternoon, we met at the University of Washington's Suzzallo Library, its Gothic architecture creating an atmosphere of solemn purpose. Elena had reserved a study room where documents were already arranged when I arrived. Before we continue, I said, closing the door, I should clarify that I'm still representing Marcus's company. There are ethical considerations. Admirable, but unnecessary, Elena replied. As of this morning, Marcus has terminated your firm's services. He's claiming conflict of interest due to your personal situation. The news shouldn't have surprised me, yet the calculated timing stung. That simplifies matters. Indeed, it also means you're free to use your knowledge of his business practices. She opened a laptop. Let me show you what I've been collecting. Over the next hour, Elena revealed the extent of Marcus's financial manipulation. Art purchased through shell companies at artificially low prices, then donated at inflated valuations for tax benefits. Client funds temporarily diverted for personal investments before being returned. Offshore accounts receiving consulting fees that matched investments in his technology ventures. This is sophisticated money laundering, I observed. With a touch of tax fraud and wire fraud, Elena agreed. But proving it requires connecting multiple jurisdictions and entities. A knock at the door interrupted us. Detective James Harper entered, nodding to me before extending his hand to Elena. Mr. Thornton, good to see you again. You two know each other? I asked. Financial crimes investigations often crossed paths with the prosecutor's office, James explained. Elena and I worked several cases together. James has been providing unofficial support, Elena added. His current position allows access to certain databases without formal warrants. The three of us spent the afternoon connecting threads between Marcus's personal and professional deceptions. Elena's prosecutorial experience complemented my corporate law background, while James provided investigative structure. His health has been declining recently, Elena mentioned casually as we reviewed Marcus's recent activities. Digestive issues, fatigue, occasional tremors. Stress from financial pressure, I suggested. Perhaps, she replied, something flickering in her expression. He's become increasingly reliant on medications. The Eastern Holdings merger is his Hail Mary, James added. His company needs their capital injection, but they're hesitant after receiving anonymous tips about financial irregularities. Anonymous? I questioned. Elena's smile was subtle. Concerned citizens have civic duties. As our meeting concluded, Elena handed me a thumb drive. Bank records from the Cayman Islands. A former client owed me a favor. This crosses into questionable legality, I warned. Justice and legality aren't always perfectly aligned, she replied. Something I suspect you're beginning to appreciate. That evening, I drove to a storage facility in Ballard, where I'd kept records from my earliest days of practice. The climate-controlled unit contained 35 years of documentation, including files from Marcus's company, before digital record-keeping became standard. The early transactions revealed patterns that mirrored his current practices, though simpler in execution. Even 15 years ago, Marcus had been testing boundaries, seeing what scrutiny his financial manipulations would attract. I created an evidence board in my home office, connecting transactions across years with colored string. The picture it created was damning, a systematic pattern of financial manipulation using increasingly sophisticated methods. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Dinner tomorrow. I have additional information about Claire's involvement that might interest you. The mention of Claire paused my methodical investigation. Despite everything, part of me still struggled to reconcile the woman I'd spent 30 years with and her role in Marcus's schemes. Cedarbrook Lodge, 7 p.m., I replied, naming a discreet restaurant where legal matters were often discussed away from downtown eyes. As I continued examining documents late into the night, an anonymous envelope arrived by courier. Inside, banking information from a Cayman Islands institution showing transfers corresponding with Marcus's art purchases. A note simply read, for justice, not revenge. Outside, the storm had temporarily subsided, stars briefly visible through breaks in the clouds. I realized I'd spent so many years documenting others' truths that I'd failed to notice deception in my own home. Now, with each piece of evidence, I reclaimed not just facts, but my own narrative. Robert had often teased me about my excessive documentation. I smiled sadly at the memory. "You were right, old friend," I murmured to the empty room, "just not in the way either of us expected." The Seattle Bar Association's Ethics Committee meets monthly in a walnut-paneled room overlooking Elliott Bay. As a longtime member, I knew precisely how complaints were processed, which made filing one against Marcus Langston a calculated opening move. "This is highly unusual, Liam," Charles Beckman, the committee chair, said as he reviewed my submission. "A complaint against your own client." "Former client," I corrected. "And these transactions occurred before my knowledge of the personal complications." Charles skimmed the detailed documentation of questionable financial maneuvers. "This will trigger an automatic referral to the State Disciplinary Board for both Langston and potentially his corporate counsel." "I understand the implications," I replied, knowing Marcus would be notified within 24 hours. The notification came faster than anticipated. By afternoon, Marcus was calling my office repeatedly. I instructed Maria to take messages without connecting calls. By evening, he appeared at the firm's reception, demanding to see me. Security footage later showed his confident stride faltering when informed I'd left instructions that he wasn't to be admitted to the premises. The power dynamic had shifted, a reality Marcus was only beginning to comprehend. Elena called that evening. "He's moving money," she reported without preamble, "liquidating art collections and transferring funds to Singapore." "The ethics complaint has him rattled," I observed. "It's more than that." The Eastern Holdings due diligence team found irregularities in the preliminary audit. The merger is stalling. "Has he connected these events to us yet?" "He suspects," Elena replied. "He's been checking my computer, phone records. I've been careful." The chess game accelerated over the following days. Marcus launched a whisper campaign questioning my competence, suggesting grief over Robert's death had affected my judgment. Several clients called with concerns about recent advice, all clients who had connections to Marcus. "He's attempting to undermine your credibility before you can damage his," Elena noted during our next meeting at the university library. "Classic discrediting tactic." "Let him try," I replied, sliding a document across the table. "Judge Wilson has agreed to speak at the Washington Legal Foundation dinner next week. She's highlighting the importance of documentation in maintaining ethical practice." "Naming you specifically." "She doesn't need to." "Everyone will understand the reference." Elena studied me with newfound appreciation. "You've built quite a network over the years." 35 years of ethical practice creates its own armor. James Harper joined us, bringing coffee and news. The SEC received an anonymous tip about Langston Innovations' accounting practices. They're reviewing the Eastern Holdings merger documentation with particular interest. "Anonymous?" I asked, glancing at Elena. She sipped her coffee innocently. "Civic duty seems contagious these days." Our three-pronged strategy took shape. The ethics complaint threatening Marcus's business reputation, the SEC examining his corporate finances, and Elena's divorce proceedings preparing to expose his personal assets. Each moved separately, but coordinated for maximum impact. "His medication usage has increased," Elena mentioned, as we reviewed financial records. "Sleeping pills, anti-anxiety medication, something for stomach issues he won't discuss." Stress manifests physically, I observed. Yes, she agreed, something unreadable in her expression. Physical symptoms can be illuminating. That evening at the Seattle Legal Forum, Marcus appeared unexpectedly, approaching colleagues with practiced charm. I watched from across the room as he spoke with Judge Wilson, his body language conveying respectful deference. "He's trying to shore up support," Maria murmured beside me, attending as my guest. "Notice how he's targeting the older partners and judges, building an old guard narrative." The strategy became clear when Marcus finally approached me directly, other attorneys within earshot. "Liam," he greeted me, hand extended as if nothing had changed. "I'm concerned about you. First Robert's death, then Claire's. Indiscretion. Perhaps you should consider taking some time off." I didn't accept his handshake. Interesting suggestion from someone facing an ethics investigation. His practiced smile faltered momentarily. "Misunderstandings can be resolved among colleagues. We've known each other 15 years. Precisely why your actions are so disappointing," I replied, keeping my voice measured. "Excuse me, I see Judge Wilson beckoning." I hadn't actually seen Martha signaling, but she played along seamlessly when I approached. "Marcus seems determined to repair fences," she observed. "Difficult when he's simultaneously trying to burn them down," I replied. Martha's expression hardened slightly. "I received a concerned call suggesting your recent documentation might be questionable. The caller implied grief might be affecting your attention to detail. Marcus's reach extends further than I anticipated." "Not as far as he thinks," Martha replied. "I've known you 30 years, Liam. Your documentation could teach a master class in thoroughness." I made that clear to the caller. The following morning, an anonymous tip reached my office regarding the Eastern Holdings merger. Documents suggested the transaction was designed to obscure financial irregularities by absorbing them into the larger company's structure. I forwarded the information to SEC investigator Harold Cooper, who had been assigned to review the ethics complaint documentation. "This isn't my first encounter with Langston," Cooper admitted when we met. "We've had our eye on him for months, but couldn't establish the connection between accounts." "What changed?" "Someone with intimate knowledge of his methods started leaving breadcrumbs," Cooper replied. "Very specific breadcrumbs." Elena, I realized. Her prosecutor's knowledge of what investigators needed was proving invaluable. Cooper spread documents across his desk. "We've discovered client funds were used to purchase art later sold at inflated prices." The pattern goes back years, but recently accelerated. "The merger was meant to cover his tracks," I suggested. "And provide liquidity to replace what he's borrowed," Cooper confirmed. "We're freezing certain accounts pending investigation." Marcus's countermove came swiftly. That afternoon, documents were anonymously delivered to several clients in the state bar, suggesting my firm had assisted in structuring the questionable transactions. The implication was clear. If Marcus went down, he intended to take me with him. "He's desperate," Elena said when I called her. "The merger's collapse means he can't replace the funds he's diverted." "He's trying to frame me as complicit," I replied. "We anticipated this," she reminded me. "Your documentation habit is your protection." That evening, examining Marcus's attempt to implicate me, I noticed something peculiar about the financial records he'd produced. Several contained medical billing codes embedded in transaction details, an unusual method to track personal expenses through business accounts. Elena's constant references to Marcus's health took on new significance. Her interest wasn't casual concern, but focused investigation. The growing suspicion that her strategy might involve more than legal consequences was confirmed when I researched the medications referenced in the billing codes. One was a heavy metal testing panel. Another was a prescription typically used for chronic poisoning treatment. Outside, the storm had returned, rain lashing against windows as thunder rolled across the city. The chess game had entered a darker phase than I had anticipated, raising questions about how far justice could go before becoming something else entirely. FBI agent David Rodriguez arrived at my office unannounced, credentials appearing before I could rise from my desk. "Mr. Walsh, we need to discuss Langston Innovations." His presence marked an escalation beyond the SEC investigation. Wire fraud across state lines had elevated the case to federal jurisdiction. "Of course," I replied, gesturing to the chair opposite mine. "Though I should note, I no longer represent Marcus Langston or his company." "We're aware," Rodriguez said, studying me with practiced neutrality. "We're also aware you've been gathering evidence of financial irregularities. What's unclear is your motivation." I met his gaze steadily. "My motivation is straightforward, Agent Rodriguez. I discovered my client was engaged in financial improprieties while simultaneously having an affair with my wife. Professional ethics required me to report the financial issues once I became aware of them." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "Mr. Walsh, we believe you were being set up as the fall guy for a significant money laundering operation. Documents recently submitted to the SEC implicate your firm in structuring these transactions." "Documents I can prove were falsified," I replied. "My documentation habits are well known in the legal community." "So we've heard." Rodriguez placed a file on my desk. "We've frozen Langston's accounts based on preliminary findings. The Eastern Holdings merger has been suspended pending investigation." The walls were closing in on Marcus, a fact confirmed later that day when news outlets reported the merger's collapse. Langston Innovations' stock plummeted, and financial analysts began questioning the company's viability. I was reviewing these developments when Maria appeared at my door. "Mr. Walsh, Claire is here to see you." The announcement caught me off guard. We hadn't spoken since her departure 3 weeks earlier. "Send her in," I said, steeling myself. Claire entered tentatively, looking smaller somehow. The confident academic presence had diminished, replaced by evident anxiety. "Thank you for seeing me," she began, remaining standing until I gestured toward a chair. "I understand if you don't want to talk." "What can I do for you, Claire?" She placed a folder on my desk. "These are what Marcus used to ensure my cooperation. I thought you should have them." Inside were photographs. Claire, with a young male student in compromising positions. Looking closer, I noticed subtle inconsistencies. "These are manipulated," I observed. "Yes," Claire replied, her voice strained, "but convincing enough to destroy my career if released. Marcus created them after I tried to end things 6 months in." I studied her with the detached analysis I'd apply to a witness. "You're claiming blackmail." "I'm not claiming innocence," Claire clarified. "The affair began voluntarily. My weakness, my mistake. But when I tried to end it, Marcus showed me these, threatened to send them to the University Ethics Board unless I continued, and provided information about my cases," I added. Claire's eyes widened. "How did you know?" "It's becoming clear that was his pattern. Affairs with strategic partners' wives to gain inside information. He threatened to destroy your reputation with falsified evidence if I didn't cooperate," Claire continued. "I chose the wrong way to protect you. By the time I realized he was using information I inadvertently provided, I was too compromised to come forward. Maria's protective stance during this confession was notable. Positioned between Claire and the door, her loyalty to me evident. "Why come forward now?" I asked. "His partners are abandoning him," Claire replied. "He's becoming desperate, unpredictable. Yesterday he suggested I should testify that you knew about the financial arrangements, that you approved them." This aligned with Marcus's attempts to implicate me. "And you refused." "I've made terrible choices, Liam, but I won't help destroy you. Not when you've been the victim in all this." Her confession complicated the narrative, but reinforced my understanding of Marcus's methods. After she left, promising to provide a sworn statement about the blackmail, I called Elena to arrange dinner. Cedar Brook Lodge provided the privacy we needed. Rain fell softly on the restaurant's windows as Elena sipped her wine, listening to my account of Claire's visit. "It fits his pattern," she confirmed, "though most of his previous affairs didn't last long enough to require blackmail. Your wife's resistance makes her unique." "Does it change our approach?" "It strengthens it," Elena replied. "Blackmail adds another criminal dimension." I studied her carefully. "There's something you haven't shared with me." A slight smile acknowledged my perception. "You've noticed my interest in Marcus's health. The medication records, the questions about his symptoms. It's more than casual concern." Elena set down her glass deliberately. "What do you know about heavy metal poisoning, Liam?" The question confirmed my growing suspicion. "Symptoms include digestive issues, neurological effects, fatigue, matching what you've described in Marcus. For 18 months, I've been introducing controlled amounts of arsenic into his food," Elena stated with clinical detachment. "Slow enough to appear as chronic illness, never enough for immediate medical concern." My legal mind immediately recognized the confession of premeditated murder attempt. "Why tell me this?" "Because you value justice above vengeance," she replied. "And because tomorrow, when the FBI freezes the last of his accounts, Marcus will likely attempt to flee with whatever liquid assets he can gather." "You're timing a fatal dose with his escape attempt," I realized. The confluence would appear natural, stress exacerbating existing health issues. Her eyes held mine. "He's hurt many people, Liam. Destroyed careers, marriages, lives. The legal system may never hold him fully accountable." The restaurant's soft lighting cast shadows across her face, revealing the cold calculation beneath her composed exterior. In that moment, I faced the most profound ethical test of my career. Knowledge of a planned murder weighed against justice for a man who had systematically destroyed lives. "Justice and vengeance aren't the same thing," I said finally. "I've spent my life serving the first. I won't end it pursuing the second." Before Elena could respond, our phones simultaneously buzzed with breaking news alerts. Marcus Langston had boarded a private plane for Panama, where he maintained banking relationships. The FBI had issued an arrest warrant but missed intercepting his departure. "It seems he's accelerated his timeline," Elena remarked, watching me carefully. "Does this change your position?" "No," I replied firmly. "If you proceed with this plan, I'll be obligated to report it." Our conversation was interrupted by another news alert. Financial regulators in Panama had frozen accounts connected to Langston Innovations based on international cooperation requests. "His options are disappearing," I observed. Elena's phone rang, the house security system alerting her to someone entering their residence. "It seems Marcus is making a final stop before his escape." The chess game had reached its critical juncture. Marcus was cornered, his financial empire crumbling, his escape routes narrowing. What remained unknown was whether justice would come through legal channels or through Elena's methodical vengeance. As Seattle's rain intensified outside, I made my choice, reaching for my phone to call Agent Rodriguez about both Marcus's flight and Elena's confession. The news arrived at dawn. Marcus Langston's private plane had crashed shortly after refueling in Mexico City. Initial reports suggested mechanical failure, though later investigation would reveal tampering with the aircraft systems. The timing, hours after I'd alerted authorities to Elena's poisoning plan, raised questions that would never be fully answered. I received the information in Agent Rodriguez's office, where I'd spent the night providing detailed testimony about both Marcus's financial crimes and Elena's confession. "Convenient timing," Rodriguez remarked, studying my reaction. "Too convenient," I agreed. Elena's plan involved poison, not plain sabotage. Mrs. Langston was in FBI custody when the crash occurred, Rodriguez confirmed, but Mr. Langston had made numerous enemies, including international partners implicated in the money laundering scheme. The investigation revealed that Marcus had been moving funds through organized crime networks, using art purchases to clean money for clients who valued discretion above all else. His attempt to escape had likely been viewed as a liability by partners who couldn't risk exposure. Justice, it seemed, had arrived through neither legal channels nor Elena's methodical plan, but through the brutal efficiency of those who considered Marcus a loose end requiring elimination. In the months that followed, Langston Innovations collapsed under regulatory scrutiny. The FBI investigation expanded to include several financial institutions that had facilitated Marcus's transactions. My documentation proved invaluable in distinguishing legitimate business from criminal enterprise, removing any cloud of suspicion over my firm's involvement. Elena's case proved complex. Her confession of attempted murder was mitigated by the fact that she had never delivered a fatal dose, and Marcus's death by other means made attempted murder charges difficult to pursue. Instead, she accepted a plea agreement for assault, serving 6 months in a minimum security facility followed by house arrest. I visited her 3 months into her sentence, bringing legal books she'd requested. The facility's visiting room was bright and institutional, a stark contrast to the elegant woman seated at the table. "You look well," I observed, noting her composed demeanor. "Incarceration provides remarkable clarity," Elena replied, "though I expect you experienced similar clarity after discovering Claire's betrayal." "Different circumstances, similar effect," I acknowledged. "The investigation has cleared my firm of any wrongdoing. I never doubted it would. Your documentation habits proved their worth." We discussed legal matters for some time before addressing the unspoken tension between us. "You reported my plan to authorities," she stated without accusation. "Yes, despite knowing what Marcus had done to you, to Claire, to others." "Because of what he'd done," I corrected. Becoming like him would mean he'd won something more valuable than money or reputation. Elena studied me thoughtfully. "You chose justice over vengeance and over me. I respect that, even from here." The visit concluded with an unexpected question from Elena. "Will you visit again, perhaps when I'm under house arrest?" The possibility of continuing our connection, complicated by shared trauma and ethical differences, remained unresolved as I left the facility. 6 months after Marcus's death, I found myself mentoring young associates with a perspective tempered by experience. The firm had not only survived the scandal, but emerged stronger, our reputation for ethical practice enhanced by the contrast with Marcus's operations. "Documentation isn't just about protecting clients," I told the associates gathered in our conference room. "It's about protecting the truth itself. The law is ultimately about human relationships. The documents matter, but understanding people matters more. Sarah Chen, the associate who had once questioned my documentation methods, now nodded in understanding. I've been implementing your system with my clients. It takes more time up front, but provides security I never appreciated before. We had established an ethics scholarship in Robert's name, funding law students committed to maintaining the highest professional standards. The memorial felt like a fitting tribute to my friend, turning personal loss into future protection against the Marcus Langstons of the legal world. Maria remained my steadfast ally, her loyalty during the crisis strengthening our professional relationship. Judge Wilson called, she informed me after the associate meeting. The Bar Association wants you to speak at next month's ethics panel. Ironic, I observed, considering recent events. Or perfectly appropriate, Maria countered. Few attorneys have your perspective now. Later that week, I received a call from Claire requesting a meeting. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop near the university where neither of us were regulars. She arrived punctually, the months of separation evident in subtle changes to her appearance. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she began. "Your testimony was helpful to the investigation," I acknowledged. "Small atonement," she replied. "The University Ethics Committee has placed me on probation rather than terminating my position. More mercy than I expected." We discussed practical matters, selling our home, dividing possessions accumulated over 30 years. The conversation maintained a civil distance that acknowledged both our shared history and its irreparable fracture. "I don't expect forgiveness," Claire said as our meeting concluded, "but I hope you know I never intended the damage that occurred." "I don't forgive what happened," I replied honestly, "but I understand more now about how we got there. That's enough for me to move forward." As Seattle's winter yielded to tentative spring, I continued regular visits to Elena, whose house arrest allowed for greater conversation depth than the institutional setting had permitted. Her perspective as a prosecutor, combined with her first-hand experience of Marcus's manipulation, created a unique understanding of how justice systems both succeed and fail. "Have you considered returning to legal practice?" I asked during one visit, noting the careful attention she paid to recent case decisions. "Perhaps consulting," she replied. "My circumstances limit traditional practice, but my knowledge remains valuable." The possibility of professional collaboration emerged gradually alongside a more personal connection, both of us cautious after our respective betrayals, yet drawn to the understanding we shared. One evening, watching rain giving way to unexpected stars, I reflected on how thoroughly my life had transformed in less than a year. The certainties I'd built over decades had crumbled, yet from their ruins had emerged new understanding, unexpected connections, and a deeper appreciation for the wisdom hard experience provides. Robert would have appreciated the irony. That meticulous documentation had saved my professional reputation while completely failing to protect my personal life. Yet he would also have recognized the resilience that allowed rebuilding after such fundamental betrayal. The storm had passed, leaving clarity in its wake, not the certainty I once prized, but something more valuable. The wisdom to navigate life's inevitable storms with dignity intact and purpose renewed. The text that wasn't meant for me changed everything, yet ultimately changed nothing about who I truly was. Through betrayal's harsh light, I discovered that integrity isn't defined by what happens to us, but by how we respond when foundations crumble. The wisdom of experience isn't just what we learn, but how we apply it when everything falls apart. My legal training taught me to document truth meticulously, yet I'd failed to notice deception under my own roof. The painful irony became my most valuable lesson. The skills we perfect professionally often leave blind spots in our personal lives. For those who find themselves suddenly navigating betrayal after decades of trust, I offer this. Your lifetime of experience becomes your greatest asset in crisis. When younger voices suggested my methods were outdated, when Marcus dismissed me as old school, these supposed weaknesses became my salvation. The methodical habits formed over 62 years provided the patience and perspective to pursue justice rather than vengeance. The difference between justice and revenge isn't just legal. It's the dividing line between being shaped by betrayal or rising above it. When Elena's poisoning plan offered the temptation of revenge disguised as justice, choosing the harder path preserved something more valuable than my reputation, my humanity. Perhaps you faced similar crossroads, moments when decades of certainty dissolved beneath your feet. Know that the dignity with which you navigate that chaos matters more than the betrayal itself. Your response, not the offense against you, defines your character. The storm passes eventually. What remains isn't the perfection we once believed in, but something more valuable, wisdom earned through suffering, perspective gained through loss, and the profound understanding that our greatest strength emerges precisely when everything we thought we knew washes away.